Today we will focus on Princess Cecilie of Greece and Denmark, Prince Philip's favorite sister. We will look at her early childhood, which was marked by political unrest, wars, and exiles, her marriage to a German prince, and we will especially focus on her tragic early death in a plane crash. Princess Cecilie was born on June 22, 1911, as the third daughter of her parents. Her father was Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark, and her mother was Princess Alice of Battenberg. Through her father, Cecilie was a granddaughter of Greek King George I. Through her mother, she was a great-great-granddaughter of Queen Victoria, who died 10 years prior to her birth. Cecilia's birthplace was the summer residence of the Greek royal family near Athens' Tatoi Palace. The young girl was baptized shortly after her birth. Cecilie enjoyed a happy childhood together with her two elder sisters, Margarita and Theodora. At 3 years old, she was joined by yet another sister, Sophie. The children grew up in Athens and on the Greek island of Corfu. Cecilie learned to communicate in English, French, German, and Greek. Despite their peaceful upbringing, the sisters' childhood was overshadowed by the political unrest in Greece at the beginning of the 20th century. In 1913, Cecilia's grandfather, George I, was assassinated. In addition, Greece was still fighting in the ongoing Second Balkan War. Cecilia's own father served in the war while her mother worked as a nurse. Only a few months after the end of the war in the Balkans, the First World War broke out. This especially affected Cecilia's family as they found themselves on opposite sides during the fighting. Young Cecilia was in fact in the royal palace of Athens when it was bombed by the French. Eventually in June 1917, Cecilia's uncle was deposed and replaced with her cousin as a new king. This forced the family to flee to Switzerland. When the war ended in 1918, the family found their relatives either dead or deposed. Further, they were marked by health problems, with Cecilia contracting the flu and scarlet fever in 1920. It was only by the end of 1920 that Cecilia and her family were able to return to their home country as her uncle Constantine I was put back on the throne. They continued to live at their former home Monrepos on Corfu. On June 10, 1921, Cecilia's only brother Philip was born there. The family somehow continued their former lives and the children were kept busy digging out pottery and bronze items at a nearby park. It was also around this time that Cecilia and her sisters began attending social events in Europe. Their lives were once again shattered after Greece's catastrophic defeat in the Greco-Turkish War. Cecilia's father was arrested and nearly executed. Her uncle Constantine I was again forced to abdicate and the family had to leave Greece in December 1922. After a journey through Europe, the family resettled near Paris. They relied on family members and friends who financed the children's education and clothes. Their time was spent walking around Paris, playing tennis, and visiting their relatives. Known as the favorite child of her father, Cecilia was also described as the most beautiful out of all sisters. She made her debut at a ball in the UK at only 17 years old. But although she was considered to be really pretty, it was not easy to find a match for her, which was mostly due to her family's poverty. There were plans to marry her off to Crown Prince Frederick of Denmark, but this did not succeed. Her family, however, did not give up hopes for a good match for their daughter, and eventually a suitable husband was found in her cousin, Prince George Donatos of Hesse. They had first met back in 1919 while in exile in Switzerland and stayed in contact ever since. Their relationship turned into a romance by 1929, and by 1930, Cecilia and Georg became engaged. George Donatos was the son of Ernest Louis, the last Grand Duke of Hesse, and was 5 years older than Cecilie. Cecilia's happiness, however, was overshadowed by her mother's struggle with her mental health. Shortly after their official engagement in April 1930, Cecilia's mother was sent to a mental hospital in Switzerland. The wedding took place on February 2, 1931, in Darmstadt, Germany. The wedding raised much attention and there were people cheering on the streets to the newlyweds. Cecilia and George were married in an Orthodox and Lutheran ceremony which was attended by around 50 guests. Cecilia's mother, however, was still absent. The couple settled at Schloss Wolfsgarten, the main residence of George's parents since their deposition. There, Cecilia quickly gave birth to 3 children, Ludwig, Alexander, and Joanna. The family led a relatively simple life, and Cecilia was involved in several charitable organizations. When the Nazi regime slowly started spreading in Germany, Cecilia and George firstly distanced themselves of it. This mostly because George's father, Ernest, was no sympathizer of Adolf Hitler's ideas for Germany. Things changed in 1937 when George, together with his brother, joined the Nazi Party, and with them, Cecilia did too. In 1935, the monarchy was restored in Cecilia's home country of Greece, and her cousin returned to the throne. A year later, Cecilia would return to Greece for the first time after 14 years. On the 9th of October 1937, Cecilia's father-in-law, Ernest Louis, died of lung cancer. As such, her husband became the head of the House of Hesse-Darmstadt. Following the death of Ernest Louis, the wedding of Cecilia's brother-in-law Louis had to be postponed to November of that same year. On November 16, 1937, the then 8 months pregnant Cecilia, George, and their 2 sons boarded a small plane which should bring them to London for the wedding of George's brother. The plane was supposed to land in Ostend, Belgium, to pick up 2 more passengers. When approaching Ostend Airport, thick fog developed, causing the plane to hit the chimney of a factory while trying to land. The plane then crashed against the roof before falling to the ground and catching fire. Cecilia, George, their sons Ludwig and Alexander, and all other passengers on board were immediately dead. In the plane wreck, there was also a body of a newborn baby found. It was concluded that Cecilia seemed to have given birth in the middle of the flight. Suggestions were made that it was not the fog but the pilot's sudden attempt to land when Cecilia went into labor would cause the crash. Despite their death, George's brother's wedding took place the next day. As you might guess, the celebrations were overshadowed by the tragic news, with all guests wearing mourning clothes. The newlywed couple stopped in Belgium to pick up the remains of Cecilia's family and brought them back to Darmstadt. Back in Darmstadt, Louis, George's brother, adopted the only surviving child of the couple, Joanna. The funeral took place on November 23, 1937. Among the people attending the funeral was also the 16-year-old Prince Philip, who now lost his favorite sister. There are famous pictures showing Philip at the funeral flanked by men in Nazi uniforms. Cecilia's death is also mentioned in episodes of The Crown in which they wrongly suggest that she traveled to London for Philip. Cecilia's parents met at the funeral for the first time after being separated for 6 years. However, the couple continued separate lives after. Alice, who had suffered mental health problems for years, claimed that the trauma of her daughter's death healed her. She from then on returned to a completely normal mental state. Cecilia and her family were laid to rest in a family vault at the Grand Ducal Mausoleum of Rosenhöhe. Sadly enough, Joanna, the only member left of the family, died only 2 years later of meningitis.